Hello and welcome to Haman Nature. On this episode, this crossover with the great Bob Murphy, we discuss his very unusual decision on who to vote for president in 2024. And in the process, we discuss a lot about voting, what the libertarian position on voting is or should be. And I push back against some of the choices that Bob made in a very interesting way. I think no matter how you end up coming down on this issue, you will find yourself with a lot more to think about after hearing Bob and I talk about who you should vote for, if you should vote, and why. Welcome to Haman Nature.
Haman Nature, a journey in search of a peaceful and prosperous society with human nature as a guide. Led by your host, Adam Haman.
Hello again, Bob.
Hello again, Adam.
So, what kind of Twitter fights you been getting in this week, my friend? This is turning into like a therapy session or something.
Yeah, it is. The big one was I told people how I was planning on voting. And then today I actually went ahead and pulled the trigger and mailed in my, early voting ballot in Massachusetts. I guess, is that not a thing, by the way? Because there are a lot of people that assumed, oh, so you're going to drive and wait in line and waste your time to do, your stupid strategy, Murphy? And I was like, no, I'm going to very quickly mail in my ballot and do my stupid strategy. So
it's a thing here and everywhere that I know, although we also do in-person early voting. And so you can just go in. It takes like 5 minutes here.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what it is. And I guess we will talk about that since this episode will drop, 6 or 7 days before, well, no, more like 4 or 5 days before the actual election.
Yeah, whatever Thursday is, the, I can't count, 30th?
Yeah, well, it'd be 5 days, right? Because Thursday's 2 days after Tuesday.
I said I can't count, Bob. You don't need to shame me about it.
Yeah, I think this time of year, Thursday happens 2 days after Tuesday.
These are the traditions.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, what was your big strategy? What did you announce that got people so interested?
Sure. And let me just, folks, so I think Adam and I, for this episode, I'll try to keep this fairly brief on the front end, but do enough to just kind of lay out the framework. And then, Adam will try to play devil's advocate. And the point of this is certainly, I'm not trying to convince any listener, you should go vote this way. That's not what I'm doing. But I guess my biggest thing, Adam, is the people that were outraged or just mocking what I was doing, their strategy was susceptible to literally the same objection. And yet they were walking around strutting as if they were kings. And it was like, no, don't you see? So that's kind of the point of going through this. It's more, I just want people to think about what they're doing and the quality of their justification. It's not so much I care what pops out of their framework. So anyway, what I did this year for the presidential race, I wrote in a candidate and I put in Jesus of Nazareth, and then it wanted his address, and I wrote the right hand of the Father. And then I left most of the other races. I left blank, and then there were some ballot propositions here in Massachusetts. Some of them, it wasn't clear to me that that either option would refrain from initiating new violations of rights, and so I left those blank. But some of them were pretty clear cut, like, should we raise the minimum wage on tipped workers or something? And I said no. And then there was one about making Uber drivers and like whatever, they had some broader category that would include them. Should they be able to unionize or something? I said no there. And you might say, well, what, you don't think people should be able to unionize? I do, but I was pretty sure that meant in the context of labor law in the United States, and hence, if at least 51% vote, then that triggers all this other stuff that I definitely don't think, is consistent with property rights of the employer. So anyway, that's that. So let's focus on, I think, with the one that people care most about is me writing in Jesus of Nazareth as president. And so the basic starting point for me on this stuff is my particular vote absolutely, under any reasonable set of circumstances, will not change who the next president of the United States is. Because for that to actually happen, two things need to occur. One, the popular vote in Massachusetts has to be decided by a margin of 1. so that my vote, would be the decisive difference between one person winning and a different person winning. And two, even that's not enough, right? So even if it were the case that, oh my gosh, Bob, Trump would have won because it was a dead tie, and if only you had not stupidly voted for Jesus instead of voting for Trump, then Trump would have won Massachusetts. So not only is that incredibly unlikely, but even if that were to happen, it would still need to be the case that in the Electoral College, the vote would be close enough such that Massachusetts going one way versus the other would have been decisive.
Another big
And
hurdle. Yeah.
Yes. And so my point is, in general, you're far more likely, if you were going to go vote in person, for example, to die in the car driving to the polls than that your vote actually matters. Okay. So now, having said that, a lot of people understandably recoil from that and just say, no, something's screwy with that logic. So let me just stop right there. So so for all the people yelling at me saying, Bob, don't waste your vote, my point is, I understand what you mean when you say that, but by the same token, anybody I vote for would be wasted as well, right? So they seem to have this idea, and the background to this is most people getting mad at me assume that I agree with them and they would be correct. I'm rooting for Trump to win, right? So I know right now in this race in the United States, the only two plausible winners are going to be Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. That's going to be one of the two.
All right,
And
good.
yes.
Yeah, you're getting ahead. I had some super intelligent questions to flesh out your position, but you're jumping the gun.
I'll just go. Yeah, I'll go like 3 more minutes at it, and then I'll stop, and then I'll turn it over to you. So let's say to make sure people aren't waiting 20 minutes with the misconception the whole time, thinking, how could these guys be this dumb? All right, so yes, I get that, but still, so then for people to think, so because of that, people assume, no, Bob, you have to vote for Trump or anything else is a vote for Kamala by default. And again, I want to say, no, not if you actually just take marginal analysis seriously. You wouldn't use that logic anywhere else in your life. Like I wouldn't say, on my fridge, I'm going to arrange the magnets to say Trump because I really think the Supreme Court's important. And I really think that, this is the most important election of our lifetime. That's why I'm doing. You said, you arranging magnets has nothing to do, right? And me going and voting for Trump in Massachusetts has absolutely nothing to do with whether Trump is the next president or not, right? So there's that element that whether I vote for Trump or Jesus or Kamala or Chase or, write in Ron Paul or whatever, that me doing that does nothing on the margin. There's virtually 0% chance that it's going to matter in that sense. So everything is, quote, symbolic and wasting my vote. Okay. So there's that element, but then let me just deal with one possible thing, Adam, and then we can just switch to conversation mode if you don't mind. So the thing I do want to deal with is there is some element there of like, and somebody even brought it up. There were lots of objections people brought, but one person specifically was saying you're being selfish, and so it had to do with like, well, Bob, what if everybody did that? That kind of a thing. That yeah, we agree. Your personal vote doesn't matter, but there is a sense in which millions of people's votes obviously do matter, and it's going to be what's decisive. And so aren't you kind of being selfish or, not taking one for the team or, not violating the Kantian principle of, why don't you do the thing that you hope everyone else. And so there I want to say, right, I get it. But it's not that I think Donald Trump is the best person to be president, right? It's not that my preferred outcome of all possible outcomes is Donald Trump winning. It's just given if you're saying, no, the only two possible outcomes are Trump or Kamala Harris, then I want Trump. And so, for example, when you say, what if everyone did that? Right. To me, it would be amazing if 250 million voters wrote in Jesus of Nazareth. And then, the people, the ballot workers were like, what the heck do we do? And so it wouldn't be that, Kamala would win. No. If everybody did what I did, no one's voting for Kamala Harris. Everyone's writing in Jesus. Right. So I'm saying people aren't being consistent. They're kind of flipping back and forth. And it seems like really what they have in mind is something like, what I'm going to do, is like, well, what if every libertarian who likes Trump more than Kamala did what you did? But you know what I mean? That it's this weird thing where they keep flipping back and forth between like a purely principled thing of, everyone doing it or, your individual vote. And I'm saying, no, just if you spell out exactly what you mean, you'll realize you have a very almost arbitrary set of assumptions about like the class of people of which I'm a part, and that I'm being principled within that small class, but not the others. Because again, if you're tempted to say, come on, Bob, if everyone did like you did, then you're just giving it over to Kamala. Well, no, because you're just assuming, therefore, that the people voting for Kamala Harris aren't doing what I'm doing. And so again, it's this weird thing where it's like a combination of principled views and pragmatism. And I'm just saying I'm just pointing out the very arbitrary knife edge almost result by which you're going to condemn me, that somehow me doing this gives it over to Kamala Harris when, and like I say, all right,
Yeah.
I'm done with that, Adam. And now I guess we could just kind of go back and forth.
I have an interesting frame for that very last objection or talking point you were just going over, but I want to handle some introductory stuff first.
Sure.
You already intimated the answer to this question, but I want to ask you directly. Do you believe that in this particular election, one candidate winning is better in some sense than the other candidate winning from your perspective?
Yes. So,
Okay.
And I understand, like, there's a case to be made, even if you thought Trump being and for all this, let's just get to save time, Adam, you know what I mean? Like, I understand somebody could make an argument that Trump is some ways worse than,
Sure.
But even for those who think on paper, Trump is better than Kamala Harris, which I do happen to, I'm not trying to be coy. There still is an argument too that, sometimes, somebody going in that's so bad, like that, that energizes everybody. So then 4 years later,
I totally get it.
If as I do, if I think the economy's going to crash, maybe we want Kamala in there so that they don't get to blame it on Trump's tax cuts, or you know what I mean? There's stuff
totally
like that too.
I didn't want to get too far afield into all that because I get it. I just wanted to ask the basic question, and if you think one is better than the other.
Yeah.
Okay.
So to not be coy, I do think this election actually is important, and I do think it makes a big difference. And yes, I am rooting for Trump to win, not because he's so great, but just because I think there's a lot of stuff in motion of bad people and plans and agendas they have, and that if Trump is in there, at least it's gonna put a monkey wrench in that and delay it for a few years while the rest of us get our plan B set up. That's kind of how I think of things.
Gotcha. Okay. Second basic question. Do you consider in your own mind not voting at all to be functionally equivalent to voting and writing in Jesus of Nazareth?
Good question. And so yes, I probably, when you say functionally equivalent in the sense of, that strict thing, but I don't think it's morally equivalent. And so that's partly why I changed and did it this way. For years, I haven't voted. And my reasoning was always, I understand the kind of thing about like, hey, hold your nose and do the distasteful thing. And I was like, but what really makes no sense is holding your nose and doing something that doesn't change the outcome. That really makes no sense. And to me, that's what voting for the lesser of two evils always was. But then I've now more come into the view of, as a Christian, that unless, like, I think you should obey the government unless they have you doing something explicitly against your moral code. So that's different now from what I would have said 10 years ago. And so in that respect, now I think, okay, it's, like if somebody at my church said to me, who'd you vote for? Did you vote or something? And I realized there are some people in my church that I could feel if I said I didn't vote just because, what difference does it make? Or I don't want to give them the satisfaction, or, some flippant answer like that. They might think I was dodging my civic duty. And so that's why I thought, okay, no, I don't want to just refrain from doing it out of cynicism and nihilism. I am going to go vote. But now, given that I am making a protest statement to say the only person I think qualified for such a position would be Jesus.
Gotcha.
So anyway, am I answering your question?
You totally did.
Okay.
My third question is an impromptu one. You just a second ago said, vocalizing your critics, hey, come on, Bob, why don't you just take one for the team and vote for whoever they think, Trump or Chase or whatever. What did you mean by that? I mean, do you think you're sullying yourself if you were to vote for someone who isn't Jesus of Nazareth? What did you mean by take one for the team?
So I think the sentiment behind people saying something like that is something like the following, that like, hey, a bunch of friends are all getting together and we all want to go see a movie. And there's 5 possible movies we could all pick. And there's one really obscure one from this actor that I love, but no one else in the group really likes. And if we were all going to go see that movie, then the group just wouldn't want to see him. They'd rather stay home. Like, that's like honestly their preferences. It's not that they're just trying to manipulate me to get their way. And it's like they want to all go see some movie that I already saw last week, and I got to drive or something. And it's just kind of like, Bob, come on, we all want to go see a movie together, and can't you just put aside your idiosyncratic preferences and kind of go along with the group, because isn't the important thing that we all go see a movie together? That's, I think, the analogy people are kind of using, that, hey, Bob, yeah, we all have our quirky preferred things, but a lot of us aren't even Christian. I wish Ron Paul would win, but, we're trying to coordinate on something. If I write in Ron Paul and you write in Lou Rockwell and this guy writes in Jesus, and we're just splintering it. Let's all coordinate. We all agree, right? Of the people that we're talking to here, that Trump is way better than Kamala Harris and that this is important. So put aside your little, I don't like what Donald Trump's doing with tariffs, and come on, put aside that quirky stuff, and I think that's kind of the mentality they're coming from. And so they're saying there's a sense in which you gotta put aside your petty grievance, just like what that means, in like.
So that wasn't. Yeah. Those weren't your words. I mean, that was just what you think they're thinking.
Yes, but I'm not saying that's crazy. Like, there are plenty of, like, literally, if you're on a sports team, it does make sense that, hey, coach, this isn't, how come this guy's getting all the points and I'm just sitting here back on defense? And is it because, Bob, what's important is that our team wins. It's not about, you getting good stats. It's about what's good for the team, and you being back there, this guy's faster than you or whatever, So that's kind of,
okay. Last question.
Like, then, the literal meaning of that phrase, I could see decent adaptations of that. And in general, I understand my sort of pragmatic logic of, on the margin, my actions doing, like, there are plenty of situations where that type of reasoning would lead to an outcome that I would think is immoral. Something like, the shopping cart stuff that people, for whatever reason, get really worked up about. Stuff like that.
Sure.
Right? So I get it. In the grand scheme, it's not going to end the world whether or not someone takes the shopping cart back. But I do, now that my kids are older, I do go out of my way to take the shopping cart back, because I realize,
for those reasons.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make an argument to flesh out that intuition as to why we should take ones for the team, but not yet, Bob, not yet.
Okay.
So I think I know the answer to this already, but you believe that it's not immoral to vote defensively. I assume that if one candidate will be, to use Walter Block's phrase, to beat you half as often as as guard meanie, you don't think it's immoral to vote for the one who's going to assault you less?
Correct. Yeah. I know a lot of people, anarchist types, do think that, yes, it's immoral per se to vote. I don't think that. And again, when I used to not vote, my argument was always just, it's not going to make a difference, right? That my vote's not going to put in the slave master who's going to whip us half as much. If it were, then yeah, let's have that conversation and think about it. And then I would have to agonize over, oh, gee, am I like implicitly endorsing this system or something? And wouldn't it be better to just not vote it up? But my point always has been, but that's not the choice any of us faces. Your vote is not going to make it so that you get whipped half as much. So,
right, but in theory it could. That's why people bring up a hypothetical, to see what you're actually objecting to. It's the only reason I bring it up.
Right. So yes, if we really were on a plantation and for some weird reason they let us vote on who the foreman was, and one of them was going to whip us a lot and the other one was still going to whip us once in a while, but not as much, and the vote was a dead tie and they looked at me and said, you get to decide, I don't think it would be obviously immoral for me to say, well, I guess the guy who's going to beat us less, right? I don't think that would be right. I'm just saying us voting right now is not like that.
Sure. I'm not trying to make that case.
Yeah, right.
And the way I usually thread that needle is to go ahead and make the vote for whichever thing I think is going to improve conditions in the real world, while never shutting up about how I think this is an illegitimate system to begin with, and we should start talking about how to change it.
Right. So can I just riff on what you just said right there, though?
Yeah.
So I agree with what you just said, but my point is, I think a lot of people hearing that will be like, yeah, exactly. So that's why I'm voting for Trump. And I'm saying, no. What Adam just said is vote for the person he thinks that's going to improve things in the world or something like that.
I have not demonstrated that case yet.
Right.
Exactly.
And so I'm saying, right. And that's why I'm writing in Jesus in terms of who would be better. Who could do more to help things in the world, Trump or Jesus? Jesus. That's why I wrote him in. You know, maybe I should say that too. I'm not, quote, wasting my vote. Like, I didn't write in Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse, which some people who, quote, waste their vote or do a protest write in just to be, you know, wise guys or something. That's why I did write in Jesus, that I was, you know, part of what I'm trying to convey. Let me, I guess one thing I forgot to mention too, I don't want to forget it, Adam, is I am actually thinking this will make a difference in the sense that some ballot worker in Massachusetts is going to see me have written that. And maybe that's a person who, like, was raised as a believer and then, you know, fell out of it and they haven't gone to church in 10 years. Maybe that thing seeing me will be the spark that will make them like, huh. And then, you know, they'll be thinking about it all day and maybe then they'll start reading their Bible again. So I actually am. So again, there's a reason I wrote what I did and not just some other goofy thing like, you know, Jim Kirk or something.
You anticipated where I was going to go next, which is that you're signaling something. I'm going to talk about signaling
Sure.
In a second, but I don't think nobody reads the write-ins. If you haven't actually filled out the bubble for a thing, those votes aren't even looked at by a human being. They're just kept tossed in the corner, and they're only ever looked at in case that number that's thrown in the corner would actually split the difference between first and second. They're not even looked at. So literally the only person who knows you wrote Jesus is you and the man himself. As much as it's a cool movie moment, you know, cinematographic moment to see the poll worker see what you've written and have an epiphany.
Well, so that's interesting. I didn't know that for sure, but partly why I just brought that up is because one of the, I think it was a woman berating me, was saying, all you're doing is wasting the time of our ballot workers. And she was saying, right. And I was like astonished. And I said, of all the possible objections, that is like so low on my, but then I even, you know, I don't know if I said it to her or I'm just, you know, thinking about it more, but no, right. That's like what I do. I mentioned this recently, Adam. Sometimes when I'm checking out of a hotel, you know, I pick my stuff up and get all packed. And then I'm going to leave a tip. And sometimes I'll take the Bible out and open it up to John 3:16. And then put the thing in there and like kind of, you know, use the TV remote to hold the book open just to like, hey, you know, some random lady who's picking up the room might see that and maybe that'll be the thing that, you know, gets her going back to church or whatever. And so that's what I was saying here. But yeah, that's obviously not like the whole point of my strategy. Okay. I jotted down something for if you run out of bullet points.
No, I got plenty.
Want to hit. Yep.
I got plenty.
Okay.
It doesn't apply in this particular election because you do think one candidate of the duopoly is better than the other. But even in cases where it's like Obama versus McCain or something, and maybe you don't think there is a difference, or Romney or whatever, or Kerry and Bush, I think there is a point. Like I will routinely vote the Libertarian candidate as long as they're not just terrible, you know. And even if they are terrible, maybe the person... when they announce on the screen what percentage of the country voted for the Libertarian, maybe it'll make people go up to the lp.org and look at the platform and say, oh, I guess I do like that. Because doing that, taking the time to vote to signal your preference is interpreted by everybody who's paying attention to politics, including the Republicans and Democrats. It's not going to be interpreted as you being flippant or being lazy and just not, you know, bothering to get up off the couch to vote. It's going to be interpreted as you saying, I want this thing that's not these other two things. And there's a pretty strong argument to be made that if you never actually demonstrate your preference and vote for what you want to see in this crappy system that we live in, how can you ever expect to achieve it?
Right. And so when I was much younger, like in my early 20s, I think that's what I did. I think there was a period where all I did was vote third party, either like the Libertarian or in I think at some periods in my life, like it was only like the Constitutionalist Party or something was the only option I had that wasn't an RRD, something like that. Or, you know, it was like that and the Green Party, and obviously I wasn't voting for the Green Party because I hate the environment so much, folks. That's why. And so, yeah, I used to. You're right, Adam. That my thinking at the time was something like, I don't want them to just confuse me with someone who doesn't really care.
Right.
Like I really do care. It's just I think this system is awful. And
this isn't apathy. This is
right,
something else.
and this two-party duopoly is the thing that I really object to. And so how can I get that across? Well, I can slightly help. Yes, that I'm realizing in practice the reason more people don't vote third party is because they think, oh well, they're going to lose, and I don't want to waste my vote. And so I thought, okay, how do we break out of that? Is there has to be an election where the third party candidate, even if not winning, gets 13% of the vote, and then everyone's like, whoa, and then maybe that makes them take them more seriously next cycle, that kind of stuff. And so yeah, even though on the margin, but still, I'm doing my little part, and it's more in that sense, it's more of like a Kantian duty thing that hey, all of us who really hate this thing, if we could coalesce and vote for, so like in that sense, Democrats who are really disgusted with Hillary Clinton, them voting for Jill Stein or whoever, I also applaud them. Like, yeah, I would much rather you go vote for Jill Stein than you vote for, you quote, hold your nose and vote for Kamala Harris or whatever. So I used to think like that, and I have no problem with that. It's just I thought this, like, it's given that my vote's not going to actually, quote, matter in that sense, then why don't I actually vote for somebody that why don't I vote for my preferred candidate? That's kind of the deal with all this. It's like, what's the point of compromising when it doesn't even achieve you anything on the margin?
I should point out that this strategy is achieving things right now on the margin. We're already influencing various races and in various states, influencing which candidates rise up through the electoral process. No, that's the wrong word. The primary process on the Republican side lately. They spend tens of millions of dollars running an election with some regime, jerk off. And then the LP guy just spends $100 on a filing fee and gets the 3% that costs him the race. And that's got people thinking, oh, maybe we should elevate more Thomas Masseys and less Lindsey Grahams, for an example. It is already starting to work, and it could work. The bigger percentage the LP gets in various spots, the more of an effect that's going to have. I mean, that is why RFK Jr. and Trump and Vivek Ramaswamy showed up to the LP convention in May.
Right, exactly.
Because that's how they perceive the situation, and they want to do something to try and benefit.
Yep, and I have no problem with that. And again, even there, though, it's like what you just said, like you were kind of taking my words and saying, when I said on the margin doing something, and you said it is having an effect on the margin, and I would say the reason Massey and those guys showing up, it's not because of what I did, right? I haven't been voting Libertarian Party. So again, it's always, there's this, I'm not like criticizing, I'm just saying, I'm just encouraging people to really think through. It's really people had this kind of implicit idea of, yeah, Bob, we know your vote doesn't matter. And we also know that you don't have the power to control how the whole country votes. But it's kind of like you're the archetype of all, people who like the Mises Institute. And like, what if they all did it? And again, I'm saying, to me, that would be cool if all, Christian, I don't expect a non-Christian to vote for Jesus. But again, it's not wasted. To me, if whatever, 100,000 people did write in Jesus, I think that would actually have some tangible results. And in terms of getting people, that's interesting. You know what I mean? So that, again, I'm just keep hitting that point, but I encourage people because it's so easy to slip into, look at all these effects and it's like, right. And that all is happening, even though I haven't been voting for the LP in 10 years. So look at that. They were achieving all this stuff and I wasn't stopping them because on the margin, my particular vote is pretty inconsequential.
No, I'm glad. I want you to keep hitting that point because now I'm going to do everything I can to push back against it as hard as I can.
Sure. And again, folks, it's Adam and I are not trying to tell you to do one thing or the other. Nope. It's more just to make sure the way you're guiding your own behavior makes sense internally.
Yes, absolutely. I endorse that thesis. All right. My following set of arguments or intuition justifiers is just concerning you, Bob Murphy, an individual. I'm going to disregard for the moment that you are a prominent voice, and when you announce what you're going to do, you can influence other people. I'm just going to ignore that. That's
right.
just
yeah. So we do it. Yeah. And I think you
argument.
do want to come back to that, right? Because I'm sure some people are screaming at us about that.
I'll address it a little bit, but again, I think that's just seasoning for the point I'm about to make.
Yes, but I jotted down for people at home, like worrying about, yeah, but you talking about it, Bob, you're going to change, so we will circle back and hit that, but go ahead, Adam.
Okay. This will take just a minute.
Okay.
The my vote won't count marginal analysis is true, and my but is lengthy. Just ask my wife. Us libertarians, us individualists, us anarchists, we do not think about collective action very well. We're not good at it. It's not natural. I'll give you a couple examples. The first is violent. Let's say in some weird hypothetical that there's 10 MS-13 gang members descending upon my cul-de-sac, and they're going to do 5 home invasions and do horrible things to the women and the children. And there are 15 able-bodied men available to fend them off if we can only coordinate our actions and, go get them. And that maybe if any single person of us able-bodied men decided not to do it, then there'd be enough to repel MS-13. But that intuition doesn't scale. If all of us take that tack, then our families are going to get slaughtered. And it's because we all correctly analyzed that on the margin, our impact doesn't really matter. And since you're a pacifist, let me also give a less violent example. In this country, we used to do a lot of barn raising. In fact, the Amish still do it all the time. And again, the marginal analysis that my helping raise the barn doesn't really matter does not scale. If everybody that could help push the pole or pull the rope to raise the wall of the barn decided to just sit at home and not do that, well, then the barn doesn't get raised. And that's what I mean when I say us individualists, we ought to seriously rethink the way we think about contributing to a collective action. And let me just add one other point before you rebut. A lot of times people say that your vote doesn't matter if you live in a massively blue or massively red state, if you're voting for the opposite tribe because of the Electoral College. And people were saying that on your Twitter threads and back and forths. And I don't think that's true, especially in a political situation where the Democrats are making arguments that we should demolish the Electoral College because, look, the person who wins the popular vote doesn't win the Electoral College. And so I think it's very useful for everybody who supports a certain candidate, not saying that you do, but you should, if you're a Republican in California, vote, even though your vote doesn't count for the Electoral College, but your vote does count for the popular vote, and that does have an impact on the national discussion. A pretty big one, since half the country wants to eliminate the thing that makes the Electoral College work.
Okay. Are you
I am
done? Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that like, are you done? Yeah. Finally. Okay. So again, even though it might have sounded to people like you were making two separate points there, they had to go together because in isolation, that last point you make, I would just say, no, you just said your vote does matter, it matters a lot in terms of the national. And I was like, no, it doesn't. If I'm in California and I'm a Republican, or if I'm in Massachusetts and I'm a Republican and I don't vote, it's, so Trump's popular vote is whatever, 86,242,347 versus 346. Like, no, that does not change the national conversation at all. Right. And so it's intimately tied to your first point there, where it's kind of like, yes, on the mark, but it's the kind of thing where if you're just assuming everyone else is doing the thing that I hope happens, if I don't chip in. So, there's a flood, and man, it really should be that a bunch of us go help our neighbors out who just got flooded.
Right.
And I want to live in a world where in my neighborhood, our neighbors help each other when there's a flood. But you know what? I'm really, my leg is sore right now. I'm not going to go do it, but I'm sure enough other people, but if everyone's making excuses, then it doesn't happen, and that's bad. So yes, I totally agree. And that's why I'm saying, I am not merely resting on the marginal analysis to say, therefore, I'm going to refrain from doing this activity because I don't see how it matters in terms of just pure, functional outcomes, that I'm tying it with usually when it comes to voting, most people frame it as, yes, he's not perfect, but you got to hold your nose and do the lesser of two evils. And that's what I'm saying is, no, if my vote doesn't really matter, like, why am I doing something that makes me queasy that I think is actually unprincipled in some sense, and it actually doesn't do anything? Right. You know what I mean? So it'd be like, okay. So you get that.
Well, no, I totally agree. That's why I asked you
Right.
earlier about the,
Right.
what did you mean by take one for the team, or did you think it was immoral to pull the trigger for a person who is, look at Trump, he's got a rap sheet as long as our arms put together. So it is distasteful in some sense. But.
Yes. So just to maybe try to clarify, when I was saying, I was, quote, rooting for Trump and all that, I don't mean that's literally the best. No, for me, it would be even better, though even less likely, if we was like, wow, it's weird. Like, Trump got virtually no votes because all these people wrote in Ron Paul, or all these people wrote in Jesus of Nazareth, and he's not an eligible candidate. And that's weird. But so I guess Kamala went, like, that's. I would actually rather that. Okay, so it's not that I'm doing the thing that's kind of self-serving and hoping other people do the dirty work that I just don't feel like doing. That's not what's going on here, even though my argument just focusing on the marginal analysis might have led people to believe that I was just, in a sense, like I say, sitting back and letting other people do this stuff that I just don't feel like doing, but I would lament. So another example would be, this is kind of like standard prisoner's dilemma stuff. Like, I want to live in a world where people don't steal, even if they could get away with it. Like, we're all better off living in a world where the standard default is most people don't steal, even if they wouldn't get caught. And so then somebody who says, oh, but given that we're in that world, now if somebody left their wallet out, and I'm looking around and I don't see anybody watching me, I'm going to take it because I think, on the margin, that's not going to cause the downfall of society, but it gives me an extra, $200. That's great. It's a win-win, or not a win-win. It's a win, on the margin. Yes, I would recoil from that, and that's not how I live my life in general. So again, I'm not saying all you need to do is just look at the state of the world based on your actions and don't consider the principles involved and moral rules and stuff like that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, though, what's weird would be to do something you actually do think is distasteful and possibly immoral, but you justify it by saying, yeah, but it's a weird thing and it's a consequentialist argument when what you're doing actually doesn't improve the outcome and you think there's some weirdness involved. That's, to me, what makes no sense.
I totally get the distinction.
Yeah.
I also think I laid out my case quite well. Let me ask another question that might qualify your decision, or analyze it from a different perspective. Take yourself back in time to an alternate history in 2008 or 2012 when you were presented with the choice of voting for Ron Paul or Barack Obama or Jesus of Nazareth or staying home. What would you have chosen if that were the case?
So I remember I never did vote for Ron Paul, even though they're even more than Trump now when he was doing well. So I was doing all kinds of stuff to promote him. You know what I mean? Like if he gave a good speech or something, or I don't know if I gave him money or not. I can't remember. No, I don't think I did. Ironically, I gave Rand Paul money, but it was because I was friends with a guy who hosted a fundraiser for him. And so then, and the guy invited me to go or something like that. I'm trying to remember. Was I there? Anyway, sorry folks. I'm going out. It's weird because I know I gave money and yet I don't remember being at the guy's house and shaking Rand Paul's hand. You know what I mean? So
did that happen to someone else?
Yeah. Right. No, I saw a movie one time. What am I thinking? Yeah. So anyway, and I just remember thinking this is going to be so ironic if Rand Paul somehow becomes president and starts a war, and then I'm going to be like, the one time I donated thinking it wasn't going to matter, and it did. And so maybe it was him running for Senate. That has to be what it was. But anyway, so to answer your question, Adam, I thought this is funny. Most people probably assume I'm voting for Ron Paul, even though I'm not, because at that point in my life, I was totally anti-voting for the reasons we're talking about.
Right, but you weren't put to this decision. I mean, it's the one thing to join the Republican Party so you can influence the primary, and it's another one to show up in November and cast your ballot for presented with him on the ballot in November as an option. We never got there.
Okay, I mean that is true, but I'm saying I remember I was saying at the time for Republicans, I was urging them vote for Ron Paul in the primary and then just vote for whoever the nominee is. So like, you know what I mean? Because even in the primary process at the time, there were people, Republicans, saying, Ron Paul's the best of this crop, but I know he's not going to be our candidate.
But I have to support Rick Santorum. I don't want to waste my vote on.
Right, like they were doing meta, strategery even at that level. And I was like, "What are you doing?" So anyway, I remember saying that hey, I get it. You don't want to, but why don't you vote for, like I say, Ron Paul in the primary? And for all that will, if he does well early on, maybe then other people will take him more seriously in the future primaries or caucuses, whatever. And but in any event, to answer your question, in practice, I didn't. But again, if you're saying, if what you're asking me is, suppose, yes, that right now the candidate was somebody, it wasn't just Trump versus Kamala, but it was
Ron Paul versus Obama,
or Vivek or somebody, like just somebody who was actually even way better than Trump is in terms of it. I would think about it more, to be, I'm just being honest with you, but I don't think that would change the essence of my argument.
That's interesting.
And I would root even more for. Yes, I hope they get in there because again, going back to our early thing where if Trump gets, I think the economy's in bad shape. They have done a lot to whoever the next occupant of the White House has a lot to deal with overseas. And so there is a sense in which, if our person, if the person we like who's in there, a lot of bad stuff can happen on that person's tenure, even though they had nothing to do with it.
All right.
Let
me ask you a direct follow-up question, because a lot of people are going to be hearing you the way I'm tentatively hearing you.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're saying that despite your understanding of marginal analysis, you're not going to do something that's antithetical to your values. You're not going to steal the wallet, even though it doesn't affect crime, overall. And I think you are going to jump in and help raise the barn, even though you could shirk and it probably would get raised. And I don't know how you feel about fighting MS-13 because you're a pacifist, but it does sound like the difference here is that you view like raising the barn as an unqualified good, assuming you value the community and the families and blah, blah, blah. However, voting for Donald Trump or even Ron Paul is somehow a bad that you don't want to sully yourself with. Will you stand by that analysis that I just recapitulated?
You're close. You're warm, when you're playing Marco Polo or something. I'm trying to think of a way to make the analogy. So yes, we're trying to raise the barn, but my neighbors are actually doing it poorly. Like it's like, oh, there's a much better way to raise the barn than what you guys are doing, and I'm going to go start doing this. And if more people did it my way, the barn would get built faster.
I get it, like a levitated,
like that,
even,
and like I'm using the tools better or something, and they're doing.
Or you use 5% of the resources if everyone would just do it your way.
Yeah. But it's hard because it's like, to really make the analogy work, it's got to be a kind of thing where me helping with the way they're doing it really doesn't help much at all. Right, and it's more like I'm almost doing it to say, everyone just look at what I'm doing over here, but what I'm doing also doesn't help at all. I guess, like if it was like it would be something like this, Adam. So yes, we need at least 1,000 or not. We need 50 guys to show up to get the thing built. And actually, I get there, and it turned out there were 65 that showed up. So it's like, oh, we have more than what we need to build the thing. And right now, like on the margin, I'm not really helping them build it at all, right? I could just sit there and watch them, and it's going to get built just the same, whether or not I'm helping. Like, I can go ahead and pick up a 2x4 and hand it to some guy, but it's not like if I refrain from doing that, it's not going to get built. Someone else will just grab the thing, right? And then I'm standing off to the side, drawing in the sand, showing them, don't you guys see the blueprint you're using is goofy? If you guys just did it this way, do you see how the house would be sturdier? And a few people are looking at me and going, yeah, but we're building it this way, Bob. And I guess the analogy would be something like that. So it's not like I stayed home to watch TV. And so, I'm not going to, it's more, I'm trying to show them this is a better way in the future. But me doing that in the dirt, I am not at all hindering them building the house the inefficient way. It would be something like that.
Okay. All right. I'm just champing at the bit to get to the thing that we've got coming forward. But I want to give you a chance to say anything else if you feel like we didn't cover part of the discussion.
So we kind of did a little, but with your when you're talking about it even makes sense for a Republican to vote, even, if he gets crushed
Right.
in his state. So just in general, people were talking about the mandate. And so they were saying, yes, even if you think, let's say, Bob, that you think of the two, Trump is by far the preferable candidate, still you voting for him, even though it doesn't matter in terms of him winning, the Electoral College, just it does help with his mandate. And like you said, partly because if he loses the popular but wins the electoral, there could be grumbling. But even even if he wins the popular, it's better to win by a bigger margin just to, pwn the libs and stuff. So again, I do understand that, but I would just appeal to on the margin whether he wins by, wins the popular by a margin of 9 million in 2 versus 9 million in 3 on the margin. That isn't too consequential. And so it's again, so I know with all these things we keep coming back to the deal, but it's that keeps popping up, that issue. Sure. And then the other one that maybe I'll not handle too flippantly that I think we should spend a couple minutes on at least is, and I'm not being coy, I really did struggle with this part is, and even looking now and realizing, Adam, that this discussion between you and me is going to drop before the election. I am concerned with what if people hearing me talk like this causes on the margin, 8,000 people who are borderline that, can't stand Trump in the grand scheme, but just think he's so much better than Kamala Harris. And they were really hoping that, the Mises Caucus candidate was going to get in and, Chase, geez, whatever. And maybe me doing this is going to be the, tip them off to they're going to write in Ron Paul if they're not Christians. And so maybe, there is a scenario, even though it's unlikely, where you and me having this conversation and dropping this episode, even if it is a 1 in a 10,000 chance, we could make Trump lose the election. And so, this kind of thing like, okay, Bob, go ahead and write in Jesus, but don't talk about it. So I could see that. And there I'm just going to say my view is, no, I'm not going to I talk about stuff and just in terms of transparency. And to me, just getting people to think properly is more important than agonizing over a very unlikely scenario. Like, I don't think in practice I really am going to change the outcome of the election even by talking about it.
Well, it's a good point. I have 2 things to say in response. The first is that if you thought that maybe your actions and you're talking about it could peel off 8,000 for sake of argument and make them right and Ron Paul, don't worry, I'm here. I've at least dissuaded people, half of those people, to not do that. And my second point,
big butt.
Yeah, exactly. But my second point is deeper, and I'm not smart enough to get all the way into it. But I do believe that if what you're doing is right, talking about it should be right. I don't want to get all logo-y and Jordan Peterson-y, but I do believe that when we speak truth out into the world, it is going to have a good effect. And if that's not the case, well, then we're probably doing something wrong.
Yep. Yeah. So, and that, yes. So we're on the same page there. But again, if I had a bigger platform and you know what I mean, that
I hear you.
maybe I would think, and I really did think at first. I didn't, I forget what pushed me over the edge. I don't know. I think it's people were annoying me on Twitter or something.
That's usually it.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm just saying I'm acknowledging that, but again, just think in practice, I don't think it's that big of a deal. And like you say, to me, given my role and things, it's to like, hey, let's think this through, folks. Like, I don't care what you do, just be rational about it, or be more rational than you are right now, that kind of thing. Also, maybe we could just spend a moment on Adam. I do think libertarian types spend too much relative time on politics. And so part of why I do occasionally tweak is that I do think libertarians and those who just really resent what's going on in Washington need to possibly pull back a little bit and say, yes, this idea of all these different strategies to elect better people, maybe other things are, but like secession, for example, maybe we should instead of us agonizing and doing all this, if more people focused on getting the public okay if Texas and Florida broke away and not bombing them, wouldn't that over the next 20 years achieve a lot more tangible results than just, hey, if we get ballot access here and we do this and this, and yes, I know you don't like Chase, but we got to maintain that anyway, because there's a lot of money in labor hours that libertarian types are pouring into that stuff. And I'm not saying it's wrong, but that's arguably that's a strategic misuse of those scarce resources.
Yeah, I agree. On multiple fronts. I mean, I think starting a family is probably more effective, or building institutions that we hope to one day grow powerful enough that they can supplant the state if it starts to wither away, as empires frequently do. So yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Let's start to wrap
On the
this
margin,
up.
though, she's got to be ovulating, and if you think about,
I don't even have to be there, honey. I mean, if you think about it marginally. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are listening to this on Haman Nature, then I implore you to go to bobmurphyshow.com to check out Bob's amazing podcast. Where else should we send the fine folks, Bob?
You mean as far as me?
You.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I didn't know if you were really giving me a chance to send them to you, and I was like, no, you tell them where.
I'll do that in a second.
Yeah. So I think I've been lighting it up on Twitter lately, folks. If you haven't been seeing it, so go to Bob Murphy Econ on Twitter. I think you'll find it's fairly entertaining if you're into that stuff.
You're not
that wrong. And yeah, my day job company Infinio.ai is where we're doing a lot of cool stuff in the financial sector in terms of well, what are you doing to bring us liberty in our lifetimes? That's what I'm spending my hours on. Like, yes, it pays the bills, but also that's partly what I'm doing, that I'm not just sitting around, throwing spitballs at the people who are actually trying to do something.
I totally agree. That's a wonderful company. And I think people should also check out the Human Action podcast that Bob is on Mises.org. And if you're listening to this on Bob's show, I would ask you to check out my YouTube show, youtube.com/@HamanNature, and also my Substack, hamannature.substack.com. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask Bob a question, and I'm going to let you hear what it is, but you're not going to hear his answer unless you go to hamannature.substack.com, become a paid subscriber. We have a whole bunch of bonus content back there, and Bob's answer to this question is going to be part of that. Are you ready, Bob?
I am.
It's a long one, but it's a good one. This is from my co-host, Tyrone, the porcupine hobo. And the hobo says, what can be done to improve the predictability of Austrian economics? We often hear something to the effect that we can't tell you when a recession will hit, but we know that if the government engages in money printing, it will create a bubble that will eventually burst. But the problem with that is that timing is everything. Suppose a scientist came to me and said, hey, there's an asteroid headed for the Earth, and it's going to wipe out all life on this planet if we don't do something. Specifically, we need to impose a one-world dictator and divert all resources to building a massive Armageddon-type project to go destroy it and conscript Bruce Willis, obviously. I might reasonably respond by saying something like, well, if that's the only way to handle the problem, then I guess I'm on board. By the way, when will it occur? And the scientist says 1,000 years from now. At that point, my response would be to tell him to go, let the people of 1,000 years from now deal with it. So in the same way, if after completely going off the gold standard in 71 and the government printing endless amounts of fiat currency, if all that hasn't ended America for going on 53 years or so, then what usefulness is the economic theory to me? If it doesn't happen in my lifetime, then how am I supposed to care about it? Don't answer yet.
Okay.
We'll see you next time, everybody. Thank you for watching Haman Nature and Bob Murphy Show.
Yep. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And maybe if you're agonizing over how to vote, that asteroid will hit Earth and you don't have to worry about it.
Good news.